Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation, Insight to Advantage, Drive Action with Customer Data. So in today's presentation, we will explore how companies can transform their valuable customer insights into tangible action plans. My name is Ashley Wolf. I'm the Marketing Director here at FuelCycle, and I'm very excited to have you all with us today. So before we start, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. So if you have any question at any time throughout today's presentation, please feel free to submit them through either the question or chat box in the GoToWebinar interface. We will catalog them throughout and come back to them at the end of the presentation. I also wanted to mention, if you haven't joined us before, we have a substantial catalog of case studies, webinars, white papers, and industry resources located on our website at fuelcycle.com, which I encourage all of you to take a look at when you have time. So today's presentation should take about 40 to 45 minutes. So again, like I said, there's lots of really great information that Annette's going to be sharing with you today that we're very excited to go over. And then we will have about a 5 to 10 minute Q&A session at the end. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenters. So Annette Franz is a recognized customer experience influencer, keynote speaker, and founder and CEO of CX Journey. She was recently recognized as one of the 100 most influential tech women on Twitter by Business Insider. Thank you for joining us today, Annette.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And sorry for forwarding the slide there.
No.
I know you were still going to introduce Rick, so I apologize. But thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this.
No worries. We're very excited to have you as well, Annette. And then our second presenter is Rick Kelly. He is FuelCycle's in-house expert on insights and customer experience. He has spent most of his career in the market research industry, working closely with clients and operations teams to ensure clients' needs are met. Thank you for joining us today, Rick.
Yeah, thanks, and I'm excited to talk later in the presentation.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I will officially pass over the presentation to Annette to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Ashley's right. There is a lot that we're going to be covering today, both between Rick and myself. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. This is sort of a high-level agenda of what I'll be talking about today. I'd like to level set on a few things before I begin any of my webinars or presentations to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'll do a little bit of a spiel on what customer experience is. We'll talk about really the meat of this presentation, which is insights to advantage, take into action planning, talk a little bit about success metrics and business outcomes, and then Rick will dive in and talk a little bit about the research life cycle. So let's get started. So again, just level setting before we even begin. What is the purpose of a business? And this is an important thing that we need to talk about, because this is what this is all about, right? Peter Drucker said, if we want to know what a business is, we have to start with its purpose. And clearly there is only one valid definition of a business purpose, and that is to create a customer. And that is what we're really focusing on when it comes to customer experience. It's to create a customer and to nurture that customer. So with that, I'll dive into my definition of what is customer experience. Oh, sorry, you know what? I apologize. I'm on this touch screen thing, and my mouse is very sensitive at the moment, so it's moving in the wrong direction. Apologize for that. Okay, so what is customer experience? And there are a lot of definitions out there about what customer experience is, and you can talk to 5 different people and probably come up with 5 different definitions, but they're all very similar in many regards. My definition is that customer experience is the sum of all the interactions that a customer has with an organization over the life of that relationship with the company. And it's not just about the interactions, it's about the feelings, the emotions, the perceptions that the customer has about those interactions. So I can't talk about what customer experience is without talking about what it is not. And what it is not is, it is not customer service. It is not customer success. It is not UX. It is not service design. A lot of those things all fall under the customer experience umbrella. But the big one that I want to talk about today, because I hear and see this all the time, is that people use customer experience and customer service interchangeably, and they're not the same. I like to call out Chris Zane, who's the CEO and founder of Zane Cycles, and the definition that he uses, or the description that he uses to differentiate between the two. He says, customer service is what happens when the experience breaks down. I think that's a great way to put it. I think that's a great way to differentiate the two. But why are we talking about this? You know, there are tons of blogs and presentations and webinars and whatnot out there about customer experience. Why are we talking about this? Why are we still talking about this, right? Why a customer focus now? There are a lot of reasons, but I like to focus on two. First, in this world where products and services are really becoming commoditized, the one true differentiator is customer experience. We know, and there's a study published just recently, and I believe it was Capgemini who did it, that customers will pay more for a better customer experience, right? So price can no longer be the differentiator, so it's got to be the customer experience. The second reason that I like to throw out there is that because so many people have gotten into this customer experience role, this customer experience discipline, this customer experience profession, and not all of them have been on what I would call a growth path or an opportunity to, you know, evolve it through the organization or to, you know, be promoted into this. They've been voluntold. And I bet if I asked you to raise your hands and ask how many of you have been voluntold, there'd be a good share of hands that go up. And what I mean by that is that you have a day job, right? And your day job is not, you are not your customer experience and this discipline is not your day job, right? It's not your job to oversee the entire customer relationship and how the organization interacts with customers and all those things. But you've been assigned to, and I'll put air quotes around it, do CX, right? And that's a good thing, but you can't just do CX, really. It's a lot of work. It's a culture shift, it's a mindset shift, and it's a behavioral shift. And so there are so many new folks getting into this profession that we just need to be really clear on what it is, how that shift happens, and what the foundational elements are. If we don't talk about it, or if we don't really make people aware of you know, what this thing is, then we end up with brands who give CX lip service, is what I'll call it. What is CX lip service? Well, I only have to pop up this one logo, and you'll probably get a pretty good sense of what I'm talking about. United Airlines, if you know, obviously they've had their share of bad press over the last several months, but you know, if you've sat on their planes as you're waiting for takeoff and you see their CEOs come on board and come on the videos that they use for their onboarding videos, and they talk about the employee experience and the customer experience, and I think a lot of that is just we can see it. It's lip service. Otherwise, some of these things that happen to this airline and a lot of other brands and a lot of industries, trust me, it's not just the airlines. If these transformations were really happening, if these things were really happening within their organizations, then these types of issues would be way more isolated, but they seem to be becoming much more and more prevalent. So how do we improve the customer experience? I like to say that any improvement that you make must be grounded in insights and customer understanding. Absolutely. You have to be able to understand the customer's needs, their pain points, and their jobs to be done, so that you can design an experience that meets those needs and meets their expectations. How do we go about doing that? We do three things. We listen, we characterize, and we empathize. And most importantly, we act on what we learn. So let me talk to you real quickly about what those three things are. Listen, this is probably a really obvious one. We don't just talk to customers about the experience, we listen as well. We do surveys where we ask, but we then listen. We go to social media, we do customer advisory boards, we have online communities. We have other ways that we listen to customers when we understand what their pain points are, what they're trying to do, what their expectations are. Characterize is the second one. Characterize is all about developing personas. Personas are huge research efforts to really understand who your customers are, and it's not just a buyer persona. When we're redesigning or we're designing the customer experience, what we need to understand is more than just what's in a buyer persona. We really do need to get to those points, and you'll hear me reiterate these, but they're important when it comes to customer experience. What job is the customer trying to do? What are their pain points? What problems are they trying to solve? What are their needs? Those are important when we get into personas that are specific to customer experience design. And then the third thing is we empathize. And by empathize, I mean we do journey mapping. We walk in the customer's shoes, or we walk in the employee's shoes. That's an important piece, and I don't want to discount that. That is an important part of improving the customer experience, is making sure that you've got a great employee experience as well. But what we do is we create journey maps. And walk in our customer's shoes and understand what the experience is today. What is the current state of the experience, so that we can then redesign to the future state, to the ideal future state. But one of the things that before I move on to the next slide, one of the things that I want to call out here, though, data is actually a huge part of all three of these. You know, listening, obviously, that's data. Characterizing, the personas, that is data-driven. That's research-driven, it's insights-driven. That is a lot of data that goes into developing those personas. And maps, in your journey maps, you're going to be bringing data into those journey maps. So I'm going to go through more specifics on that, the data piece of it, through the meat of this presentation, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So before I dive into that, though, and before you begin any of the work that you need to do, what you really need to do is define your goals. Define your goals and your desired outcomes, both for the customer and for the business. For example, this slide here, I've got some typical desired outcomes, right, for both the business and for the customer. For the business, it's often about increased revenue, reduced costs, and that might come in the form of retention, and increased revenue might come in the form of retention as well. And then culture change. And culture change is really critical to what you're trying to do in terms of the customer experience transformation. For the customer, we're looking at things like reduced effort, and this is a big focus right now. Reduced effort, increased satisfaction, meeting expectations, and then ultimately and overall just improving the experience. So let's go ahead and dive in. So when we talk about Insight to Advantage, there are 5 steps, and these are the 5 steps that I'm going to go through today. I know the presentation in this slide is, Insight to Advantage, but everything really begins with the data. I won't focus as much on the data. I'll talk about it for just a second, but we do need to mention that data is obviously at the root of all of this. I want to just, before I move on to the next slide, I want to quote an interesting statistic about data-driven environments and data-driven success, right? So in July 2017, Workday and The Economist did a survey, and they found that 59% of the respondents who described their organization as data-driven said that their company is more profitable than their competitors. And that was compared to 40% who said that they do not work in a data-driven. So 59% said that data-driven environment is really obviously beneficial to their business. Okay, so let's start with the data. At this stage, what's really happening is we're listening, we're gathering, and especially we're centralizing the data that we have. We need to make it accessible to the entire organization. We've got tons of data, right? You've got a ton of data. You've got survey data from listening. You've got diagnostic data. You've got behavioral data. You've got demographic data. You've got psychographic data, interaction, transaction, sensors. Now that we're moving into AI and all of that, robotics, web, social, and a whole lot more, right? You have a ton of data. There's no doubt about it. And here's the interesting thing, though. You're going to generate more data in the next 12 months than you have ever before in the history of your company generated. So you need to know how to make sense of it, right? I'm going to get into that in just a second. But what about competitive data? I didn't mention any of that on that previous slide, but I did want to bring it up because I think this is an important sidebar. I like to say that winners focus on winning, losers focus on winners, right? So you really have 2 choices when it comes to competitors and competitive data. You can focus on your competitors, or you can focus on delivering results for your customers, and then let the results speak for themselves. But what I would say is never lose sight of your competitors. Your competitors and doing some competitive benchmarking and having a clear picture of the entire industry is really key to your success. So include that competitive data insights in your analytical toolbox. I just wouldn't dwell on it, right? I love to say innovate, don't imitate. So I think it's good to just know where you stand. Okay, so back to data-driven decisions and data-driven success. One of the first 3 stages here is where a lot of companies tend to get stuck in that sort of VOC data success continuum. And more people really, and more companies need to really move through this evolution or progression a bit faster, especially today, especially where we are today with the volumes of data and the speed at which customers expect you to know them and personalize and all of these other things, right? So the progression right now looks something like this, right? When companies get started, it's all about feedback. It's focusing on surveys, listening, and data. Then they sort of move into this next phase where it's all about metrics, making the numbers, moving the score. And unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck there, right? They stay there. Then the next step in the progression here is really about focusing on interpreting the data, telling stories with the data, and then making data-driven fixes, making data-driven improvements, right? The next progression here in this evolution is focusing on outcomes, where the organization then ties their data to operational metrics, business outcomes. There's a clear linkage there. And then finally, the last phase of or progression in this evolution is around innovation. When we start using data to develop new products, design a better experience, data-driven, this is all about, you know, the data-driven enterprise, as I mentioned on the previous slide. Then we've you know, got real success here when we're innovating and we're redesigning based on the data that we have from and about our customers. That's what success looks like. So if you find yourself somewhere on that continuum, think about how you move to the next level, right? Because that's what you've got to do. You've got to move up that level and get over to the innovation stage. So let's move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is insight. And what we mean by insight is really deep understanding of a person or thing, right? Truly understanding something. So you need those insights about the customer's needs, their jobs to be done, here I go again, right? Pain points, their expectations, and how well we're meeting them. Decisions that are supported by insights really give companies strong competitive advantages by enabling them to adapt more effectively to changing market conditions. They drive operational efficiency throughout the organization and allows them to take on new opportunities, right? Companies that are slow to adopt analytics, on the other hand, they really run the risk of being disrupted. And then they're outmaneuvered and they're outshined and they're outperformed by really what we would call faster and more agile. Agile is a big word that's being used in companies now, especially around CX too. So being more agile and insight-driven companies who are outshining companies that are not doing these things. But here's an interesting conundrum that we've got out there, right? So this is some research that was done by the Economist Intelligence Unit. How can we truly understand our customers and get those insights if we don't know how to analyze the data or use the tools, or our tools are outdated? And that's what we're seeing here. You know, 43% of their respondents had a poor understanding of how to use data analysis. And then, you know, these other buckets here are pretty daunting as well. This is probably one of my favorite ones: limited imagination in the use of analysis, limited support for the use of analysis to guide decision, lack of trust in the analysis. I think we probably see that. We probably get beat up about that a lot because, you know, you can never trust the data, right? Poor tech, that was very sarcastic, but and poor technology that supports the analysis. So this is a problem, you know. So these are things that need to move up in that evolution, and we need to figure out and find a way to get those new tools and the right people and the right resources into our organizations to do this analysis in a way that makes sense and is actionable, right? And a way that's not, and that's a great segue into my next slide, which is a way that's not arcane and not actionable. So you might be using a quad chart in your analysis. You might be using this quad chart, and if you don't know what a quad chart is, it's really taking a look at the satisfaction of an attribute in your survey versus the importance of that attribute. And for those attributes where they are low satisfaction and high importance to the customer, those are what we consider the priority improvement areas. And then if it's low satisfaction and low importance, those are secondary improvement. If it's high satisfaction and low importance, those are sort of the fundamentals that you've got to have in place for every customer. And usually things like courtesy and professionalism fall into that bucket. And then in the upper right-hand corner, we've got those attributes that usually have high satisfaction and high importance. And we always say maintain those and, you know, use those to amplify, to you know, tout the things that you're doing well, right? But here's the problem, and this is an interesting story that I have to share. I was speaking at a conference earlier this year, and I put up this slide, and I said, how many of you in this room, and there are probably about 125 people in the room, how many of you are using quad charts? And every hand went up. Like within a second, every hand in the room went up. And then I asked the question, which was, how many of you have actually made a change in your organization to some process, to something, as a result of what you uncovered on a quad chart? Not a single hand went up. And that was really, that was really shocking. I thought maybe one or two might go up, but not a single hand went up. And people came up to me after the session too, and were like, wow, you were spot on there. We don't know what to do with that. We don't know, what does that mean? The dots right by the line, and how do I act? Those two dots in the upper left there, they're right next to each other. Which one comes first? People get paralyzed by stuff like that. So, and the crazy thing is I'm actually guilty of perpetuating this so-called tool, because in my career, as I came up through the ranks in this space, this was the tool that we had. This is what we had to work with. But that's really not the case anymore. There's a lot of cool stuff happening out there. So what I want to do is take you through another evolution here. And this is the evolution of analytics. What is that, you ask? Well, the traditional tools that we've always had to analyze our data have been the descriptive and the diagnostics, right? Those are the things that are sort of reactive and hindsight, and they're informative. They tell us what happened and why, right? What we have, oh, sorry, there's supposed to be a red box around that. That red box is gone. I'm sorry. What we have to work with now, though, and is becoming way more prevalent at this time, are the predictive and the prescriptive tools. And the predictive is really telling us what's going to happen. They're proactive, and there's foresight there, right? And the prescriptive is, well, now that you've predicted that, how are you going to make that happen? It's proactive, it's personal, it's tactical, strategic. There are answers available at all those levels, actionable answers that you can go and do something with. So take a look at what's out there if you're still using some very traditional tools to analyze your data. The last one here in the evolution is what we call automated analytics. And this is something that loops and acts on itself and learns and is self-aware, and it's continuously updating based on the data. There's real-time offers, it's self-aware, it's proactive, and this is really the data, or I'm sorry, the analytics and the tools that are in self-driving cars. So think about it that way. It's the self-driving car is always learning from your actions and your responses. So this is an interesting thing that you ought to take a moment and heed the evolution of analytics, and take a look at some of the new tools that are out there and available to you to really make, get actionable insights into your data. All right, so speaking of action, this is my third step, and the key here is that insights alone don't cause change, right? Or they don't create change. Change really requires action. But here's the crazy thing. Companies ask, they listen to their customers, they have all this data, but they don't act. This is some research from the Temkin Group from last year. And what they found was that really only 34% of their respondents who have responded to this VOC, State of the VOC programs survey, were really acting and doing something as a result of the feedback that they had gathered. I'm sorry, but the text is backwards on here, but it is really only a third of customers who are making changes to their business based on the insights. So really, the answer is right there. It's all in the data. They just have to do something with it. But instead, what happens? They do one of two things. They either, number one, they collect feedback, and I like to tell this story. I like to say that it's like collecting stamps, right? So what happens when you collect stamps, right? You buy the stamps, you put them in a book, you put the book on the shelf, and you just forget about it. Think about how many dusty report binders are sitting on your manager's bookshelf, right? Or in an electronic folder on her desktop. It takes a long time, especially if you're using these traditional analytic tools. It takes a long time to do all the analysis, and then when it's done, it goes and sits on a shelf somewhere, and nothing gets done with it. It's reporting out ad nauseum, right? But then nothing ever gets done with it. And part of the problem too is that analysis takes so long that by the time it gets reported out to all the different groups, there's other things happening already. They've already moved on to something else in their minds, have other work that they need to do, or the feedback, is stale at that point. The other thing that happens is that companies chase the score, right? They focus solely on the metric. So they try to move that metric instead of improve the experience. And what happens when you do that is you elicit different kinds of behaviors, right? They are not the same actions when you chase the score versus fixing the experience. When you try to move the metric, it's really what it does is it elicits detrimental and inappropriate behaviors, right? There's gaming of the system and undesirable effects that really derail the purpose of listening to your customers. But when you're focusing on making improvements, it's changing behavior. It's in a good way, right? And you're actually seeing those improvements as they're happening. So there's a huge difference between chasing the score and making improvements. So instead, you really need to act on those insights, right? Insights that result in no action are just expensive trivia. So think about those binders sitting on your manager's bookshelf. Those are expensive trivia, and you know, all of you know, you have expensive trivia sitting in your office or on your desktop somewhere for sure. So really, the only way that customer listening programs are successful is when you do a couple of different things. You make the improvements based on what you hear. You close the loop with the customer, and then you let customers and employees in on it. You let them know what you did. So I'll come back to that in just a second. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is you know, you've done this analysis. I've talked about the evolution of analytics. You've done the analysis. You've uncovered some issues, right? But that's just the first part of it, right? Once you've identified the issue, the next thing you need to do is do some kind of a root cause analysis. You can't fix it if you don't know what caused it, right? Otherwise, it's really just a Band-Aid. So I like to use the 5 whys methodology for uncovering root causes. So this is what this diagram here is on your screen. So you would use something like this. You would enter what the issue is, and then you would ask why it occurred 5 times. So the first question would be, well, why did that happen, right? And so you would put the reason in there, and then the next person will say, well, why did that happen? And you can, sometimes it's more than 5 whys, and sometimes it's less than 5 whys, and sometimes it is 5, right? So you keep asking why something happened until you get to the root of the issue. And there's an alternative over here on the right-hand side, and an alternative approach. You could simply just go down what you see on the left-hand side and be done with it. Some people like to use what's called the confirmation method. So after each why, somebody goes and confirms that that's actually the reason, right? That's an actual reason why. And you do that after each step. And if it's confirmed that it is, then you move on to the next why. If you confirm that it is not, then you start over again and keep asking the why. And the cool thing about when you've got the root cause, right, like I said, you can't fix something until you know what's actually caused it. The next thing that you do is develop your action plan. That root cause really seeds the action plan. And so once you've got that root cause, from there you can just brainstorm and ideate solutions. And some people like to use the so what to get to the best solution. So again, you do the 5. You come up with a solution and you ask so what 5 times. There are all kinds of different ways that you can come up with the best solution, right? So find out the best way that works for you and for your team. But really, what I've got here in front of you is an action plan. What it's looking at is, what's the root cause? What are the actions to be taken? What are the outcomes? Who's going to own this? This is really important. Who's going to own it? What resources will you need to commit to this to make it happen? What are some quick wins that you can call out so that people really get engaged in what it is that you're trying to do? And then, the bottom 2, or actually I should say the next row, is really about getting buy-in and commitment for the budget to do this, right? And the budget and the priority. So you want to think about what's the impact on the customer, what's the impact on the business in terms of revenue, what's the time to fix, what's the cost to fix. Those are all things that are going to be important to your executives so that they can assess relative to other priorities and assign a budget for that. And then, you also want to obviously think about feasibility and what your success metrics are. So think about these things as you're developing your action plan. And each action to be taken, whoever owns that is going to then develop their own project plan around the specific work that needs to be done. I write about this. I just finished a white paper for Fuel Cycle. You can find that. And Ashley, I believe, if you want to, feel free to chime in, but I believe that's available today, and we can provide you with the URL for where to download that.
Yes, it's on the website, and then we will be following up in an email with it attached to all registrants.
Awesome, great. And I go through a lot more detail about action planning, how do we motivate our employees to become a part of this, and then talk a little bit too about that project planning that happens after you've identified and have an approved budget to go ahead and make the changes that need to be made. So I'm going to come back for a second to one of the things that I brought up on a previous slide, which was around closing the loop, right? And I think this is an important action, probably one of the most important actions that needs to be taken with your data, with your insights. The first way that we close the loop, and there are three sort of key level-based ways that we close the loop, and then the other two are really more constituent-based. So let's start with the level-based. So the first thing you want to do is you want to, with your customers, after they've responded to a survey, giving you feedback, is service recovery. If there's an issue, if it's generated an alert, if there's a problem that the customer says has not been resolved, if it's negative feedback, whatever it is, and you can close the loop with those who've responded positively as well and thank them for their feedback. But for service recovery, what we want to do is we want to follow up with those who still have an issue and get that issue resolved in a very timely manner. The second level that we want to close the loop at is the tactical. So by that I mean that we're going to go to the stakeholder and the department level, and we're going to provide them with the data and the insights and the action items that they need to work on to improve processes and things that are happening at that department level. And then the third level that we're going to close the loop at is that strategic level. It's the big picture, company-wide. What does the organization need to do overall to improve the employee experience, to change the culture, to improve the customer experience, all of those different things. So coming back to the executives and saying, listen, this is what's happening within the organization. Here are some big picture things that we need to think about, some systemic, organization-wide systemic changes that we need to make. And like I said, number 4 and 5 are more about constituents that you're closing the loop with. So we always want to close the loop with our employees. Whenever we have feedback, whenever we make changes, whenever we're making improvements, we always want to make sure that the employees are involved in this. So whether it's sharing the feedback, especially if it's specific about them, rewarding and recognizing great performances and great experiences, and coaching them when things don't go as planned, right? Employees should also be kept in the loop if changes are made. Obviously, it's going to change the processes and the way that they do business, work with your customers and the way that they do business themselves, right? So employees are often forgotten, unfortunately, in some of this closing the loop. And then the fifth one is obviously we need to go back and close the loop with our customers. Any improvements that we make as a result of their feedback, we need to go back and let them know. Thank you for your feedback. As a result of your feedback, here are the tactical and the strategic changes that we've made to our organization. So customers, if they know that their feedback is valued and used, they will continue to provide feedback. So just keep that in mind. This is key, closing the loop with all 5 of these. All right, so step number 4 is all about outcomes. So if you did the work, if you developed your action plans and held those who are responsible accountable for that, if the improvements have been made, they've been tested, and they've been implemented, you're going to feel this. You're going to feel these outcomes, and so will your customer. You'll have that ROI. You'll have achieved those outcomes that we just talked about. So just as a quick refresher, here are some of the outcomes that we talked about. And in a couple of slides, I'll get a little bit more detailed into some of the specifics behind each of these. I'm often asked, how do I measure success, right? How do I know when my transformation or my improvements or the work that I've decided to do here, the bigger picture is really the organizational transformation and improving the experience for employees and customers, is how do I measure that success? And it can be broken into 2 buckets, but there are things that happen for both the customer and for the business, right? So the business will start to see that ROI. We'll see cost savings. We'll see retention. We'll see revenue bump up. And I just threw in a more tactical one, first call resolution. It's a huge time and cost savings for many organizations. Over on the customer side, that first call resolution is a huge time and cost and frustration savings for our customer as well. So some of their success metrics are NPS. Are they recommending? Are they recommending the business? And if they are, then they've had a great experience, most likely. Their customer satisfaction, their customer effort score will tell us, has this work that we've done been a success for our customers? And then we think about employees and the impact on both of these, both the business and the customer, right? So we look at metrics like employee engagement, employee satisfaction, percent ownership of customer issues. This is an interesting one. How engaged are they in this transformation, right? And how much are they taking ownership in the issues that are coming up? And this is also an interesting one too that I like to talk about, which is the percentage of employees who know the drivers of customer experience. Because then you know that you've closed the loop. If your employees know what drives a great customer experience, then you know you've done a good job of closing the loop with your customers and sharing the feedback and making sure that they're in the loop on everything that's happening. And finally, the last step is, you know, you've done all this hard work, you've achieved all those outcomes, and all of that yields advantages. Remember that customers will pay for a better experience. I think that's an important thing to keep in the back of our minds. So let's talk about some of these advantages. Advantage number one, outperform competitors, right? When you use design thinking or human-centered design, data-driven processes as those tools for your success, then you'll know the customer experience advantage. When you're innovating, you're using customer feedback and data to create new products, to enhance the existing ones, to design a better experience, then you'll know this advantage. And this advantage, again, is you're outperforming your competitors. Forrester compared compound average revenue growth for CX leaders and CX laggards in their CEI, their Customer Experience Index. And clearly the CX leaders have the advantage here, right? There's almost a 6x differential here between growth for CX leaders versus CX laggards. Second advantage, outperform the market. When companies are tying their VOC and their CX data to operational metrics and business outcomes, they're going to feel this advantage, right? This is a chart that I'd love to share when I'm talking about why customer experience is so important, right? This is research that John Picoult from Watermark Consulting has done for many years. And what he has found, and again, he took the customer experience leaders and laggards from the CEI, Forrester CEI, and compared them to the performance on S&P 500. And what he found, clearly, the customer experience leaders outperform the market by a long shot. One more, advantage, outperform the market, right? This is a new one. This is a new metric that has come up recently from American Customer Satisfaction Index. It's just one more proof point that focusing on the customer and the customer experience is going to reap or yield great benefits for your business. Next one, advantage, business outcomes. We talked about business outcomes at a high level. Here are some of the very specific outcomes that you'll be able to see. Reduced churn, increased retention, both for customers and employees, brand preference, stronger relationships, reduced sales cycles. That's going to make your salespeople happy. Potential new business from existing customers, so expanding their buying power. Process improvements and efficiencies. New products and features and enhancements to existing products based on what the customer needs and what jobs they're trying to do, right? Recommendations and referrals, reduce sales and marketing costs because you've got people out there referring your business and your brand and your products. And culture change, that's, you know, not just a product or an outcome of this work, but it is part of the work as well. And then last but not least, greater shareholder returns. We can't forget about them, but we certainly cannot put them first because the employees and the customers come first. And then finally, last but not least, advantage customers. They're going to have a better experience. They're going to be able to do what they're trying to do when they're, you know, interacting with your organization. And they're going to do so with less effort. They're going to have less frustration. They're going to feel like the business cares about them, and they're going to feel like they're a part of something bigger. Customers who are satisfied and have had a great experience are going to stay longer. They're going to buy more. They're going to be less price sensitive. They're going to tell their friends. They're going to want the business to succeed and more. So advantage business as well. What's your advantage? How are you going to get there? So just a quick wrap up here in terms of next steps for you, right? So here's how you're going to get started. You're going to define your desired outcomes and the success metrics. You've got to know those up front. You're going to centralize your data. You're going to analyze it. And as you're analyzing, you're going to think about that evolution of analytics and use those advanced analytics that get you more actionable insights immediately, right, faster. You're going to identify root causes and develop action plans. You're going to go and do the work, right? You're going to test it, you're going to measure it, and you're going to continuously improve. You're going to close the loop at all 5 levels. Understand and keep an eye on the competition, but don't dwell on them, and then make sure that you tie your customer data to financial outcomes. it's hard work. It's it's a lot of hard work. I know that. I summarize it in several bullet points, but those are the things that you're going to need to do to experience those advantages for yourself. I thank you all for your time. With that, I am going to turn it over to Rick, and I know we'll be taking some questions at the end, but just if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me through my site, cx-journey.com, or Annette at cx-journey.com. All right, take it away, Rick.
Awesome, thanks, Annette. First of all, I was really impressed. I like the wealth of information. This is a very, very meaty webinar and discussion so far. I think one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting was really around the this theme about using insights to create an advantage, right? So there's 2 points that you brought up during your presentation where you said, hey, data-driven organizations outperform others, but it's not just data-driven organizations. It's data-driven organizations that use that information and insights to turn it into a better customer experience that end up outperforming others, right? And I think those two things are closely aligned. And so, when we think about this, really it's around the idea of how not all insights are created equal, right? So you can generate lots of data, and in fact, like you said, most companies are going to generate more data this year than they have in the previous last 10 years or last 100 years combined. And so in order for us to effectively take that data, turn it into actionable insights, and then take action on that and action that results in increased profitability and growth, we have to have the right audience, the right methodology, and the right analysis. And this is really where Fuel Cycle comes into play, because these are the types of things that we help many of the world-leading Fortune 1000 companies do on a regular basis. And how we do this is we help customers walk through like the research life cycle. So we start with things like around product development, go-to-market experience, brand health, customer experience monitoring, and revenue extension, and kind of take organizations and enable organizations to collect data continuously and pump that back into the organization. So it makes for a highly responsive, kind of agile way of responding to questions or business concerns or business questions in general inside Fuel Cycle software platform. And so I think the things that we touched on today, or that you touched on today, are closely aligned with our principles and how we think about the importance of not only collecting data, but collecting effective, clean data that can be used to generate a better customer experience. And you really do that through using that data throughout the entire research or customer life cycle. And with that, I think we're open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Annette. We're
Awesome.
actually right on the 45-minute mark. So we have time for probably about 5 or 10 minutes of questions. So anybody who's still on the line, I just wanted to remind you, if you do have any questions that you would love for Annette or Rick to answer, please just put them into either the questions or chat box on the GoToWebinar interface. But I do have the first question came in from John, and I believe it's for you, Annette. He asked, continuous improvement is key to any VOC initiative. What can I do to make sure my Voice of Customer initiative remains fresh and relevant?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. Continuous improvement is huge for all of this, right? Because that's why I call it a journey, right? Because once we feel like the work is done, it's really not done. It's really going back and making sure that we keep the experience fresh and keep it up to date. So I'll focus specifically on VOC. I think one of the things that we need to do is revisit our surveys, revisit our listening posts, revisit the way that we're getting that feedback from our customers, because what ends up happening is over time, as we listen and we make changes, the questions and the things that we're asking become stale because they're no longer relevant. They're no longer up with the emerging trends, new customers who have come on board, new products that are in place, the improvements that we've made, right? So that's key. I think we also need to use innovative approaches to listening. I'll throw out an extreme, right? We no longer, well, some people still do use paper and pencil, but those are no longer the best ways to listen to our customers. We need to make sure that we're using surveys that are what I'll just call more dynamic. And there's some a lot of tools out there where you can, for the next question, that it's almost AI, right? It's predicting what the next question is going to be based on your response, or it's more than just skipping based on your response. It's really more of a conversation type survey because it's predicting based on your previous responses. We also, another thing that's really taking advantage of some of the latest technology as well is don't assume that we know the drivers. So when we design, and the attributes, right? So when we design a survey, a lot of times we just go in based on some of the things that we heard and we know are issues, concerns, priorities, things that are important to our customers. But what I think that what I'm seeing happen more and more is that companies are asking open-ended questions. They're doing text analytics on those questions, and through that text analytics, they're identifying what are the key drivers, what are the emerging trends, and those are the things that they then use to redesign their surveys and ask as those things as attributes and drivers on their survey. And the last thing that I'll mention is think about the approaches that you're using to listening, right? Expand on what you're doing. Don't just use surveys, because I think people are getting burned out on surveys. So use other approaches, right? Use online communities, use social media, use client advisory boards, use different approaches to listen to customers. And they will be, if they're designed properly and used properly, they will be equally effective.
Great, thank you, Annette. That was really great. So the next question we have, I'm very sorry if I mispronounce this, I believe it's from Kirill, and they ask, how can transactional surveys be used for CX management? So I think that's a perfect follow-up to the last question, Annette.
Yeah, transactional, so read the question again. So transactional surveys used for?
CX management.
Okay. So transactional surveys are really key. They're important to what I, in my closed loop, would be tactical, which I basically deem to be more at the department level, right? So you're you're improving or listening at a touch point and improving that touch point. But the thing that's important to remember here is that the customer experience is about journeys, not about touch points. So we don't want to get stuck just listening at that transactional level, right? We want to make sure that we listen at all of the touch points along the journey, and also get a bigger picture sort of relationship type of read as well, overall brand read as well. So I think that's the key thing that I would pull out of all of that is to remember that customer experience and customer experience management are about journeys, not about touch points. So if you're just listening at support or just listening about a training experience or those kinds of things, you've got to broaden your horizon and get a bigger picture of the customer experience and the customer relationship.
Yeah, and this is Rick too, and that's really important to emphasize the need to listen throughout the customer journey and to get multiple touch points, because if you're only listening to one touch point, you over optimize for that particular touch point, right? And you don't necessarily, you can't identify its relative weight in your customer experience or the customer journey management program to emphasize the right things correctly. And so,
yep, great point.
Yeah, definitely have to be listening across the board.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. So I have one final question, but before I read that out, I did want to encourage anybody, if they're still on the fence, to please submit their questions now so we can answer that before we close out this webinar today. So the last one comes from Sam, and so she asked, how can we turn data into actual insights and convince the score chasers that there is a better approach? So I believe, Annette, that's probably a great one for you to take.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. I think we need to start with the why, right? I think first of all, we need to start with why are we doing this? Why are we listening to customers? And true, in a lot of organizations, it's like somebody got this great idea that we've got to track NPS or we've got to track CSAT or whatever that score is. But so I have a couple of different thoughts here. As you're going through and getting the commitment from your executives for the work that lies ahead and for this transformation, you've got to make sure that you teach them about why we're doing this, right? And teach them the difference between what happens when you chase the score and when you actually improve the experience. So I'm going to start with the beginning, right? So first thing we need to start with is objectives. What are your objectives? Why are you doing this? What are your desired outcomes, right? What what's the purpose for listening to our customers and for tracking these metrics? If the response is just to track metrics, you may as well just throw the program out the window, because it's going to be a waste of everybody's time. The next thing you want to think about is, what problems are you trying to solve? Let's say you've gotten past that point. So then we want to think about, what problems are you trying to solve? And then making sure you've got multiple streams of data, not just survey data, right? There's more to customer data than survey data, and to getting that NPS metric or the CSAT metric, right? So I think that's actually key to moving away from chasing the score, is to bringing in those other streams of data. I think I'll leave it at that, because I think that's probably a big thing right there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Annette. So that does appear to be our last question for the webinar, which is good because we're approaching on the hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So with that, I really want to thank you, Annette, and Rick, for joining us today. This was so much great information and so many things that they can act on and take back to their organizations right away to see an impact on their customer experiences. So thank you guys so much for that.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again to all the attendees. So that'll be it for the presentation. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we will be sending a follow-up email with the recorded webinar and the webinar recording and a PDF version of the presentation, and that should go out on Monday. So until then, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.